I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar, High Performers in Mental Health, Sustaining Excellence Without Burnout. My name is Lindsay. I'll be your moderator for this webinar. And by the end of the session, you're going to learn how to recognize common mental health patterns among high performers, understand the internal patterns that drive high achievement and frequently the pressure, reframe perfectionism and self expectations. And I am so excited to hear you talk about this one, Natalia. Set boundaries that support, not hinder your performance, and build habits that make high performance sustainable over time. We're really excited to have Natalia Andreev, clinical manager at Tava Health and licensed professional counselor, here with us. Let me give you a little bit about her expert background, and then I'll do some housekeeping and we'll get into it. So, Natalia, MSLPC NCC, is a senior clinical operations manager and a licensed professional counselor with a strong background in both direct clinical care and behavioral health operations. She's passionate about helping individuals navigate life's challenges and incorporate sustainable mental health practice into their daily lives. She holds a Master's of Science in Counseling from Rutgers University and utilizes evidence-based approaches, including cognitive behavioral therapy, solution-focused therapy, motivational interviewing, and mindfulness techniques in her work. In her current role, Natalia collaborates with cross-functional teams to advance clinical quality, support therapist development, and improve access to mental health services at scale. She's committed to creating environments that promote growth, resilience, and meaningful change, both for the individual she supports and within the broader mental health systems that she helps lead. So welcome, Natalia. A few housekeeping notes, and then I'll hand you off. So all guests are muted with cameras off to ensure a smooth event and to preserve audio quality. This means that questions, which are encouraged, should be asked via the Zoom Q&A function. Ask these questions as they come to you so that Natalia can answer them in the moment. Early in this presentation, Natalia is going to introduce polling questions. Make sure you have your phone handy to participate. And finally, yes, this session is being recorded and will be shared by early next week. So that's all from me now. I'm going to hand it off, and Natalia, you take it away.
Thank you, Lindsay, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar, which is on high performance and mental health. If that's the topic you're here for, again, welcome. If you're not and you wandered here by chance, please stay. It's a great topic to talk about. And last month, we actually had a webinar and spent some time talking more directly about the burnout, what burnout is, how it shows up, and why burnout really matters. And today we're going to actually build on that, and we're going to address burnout from a slightly different angle and focus specifically on high performers, people who are often seen as reliable, capable, very driven, very motivated, deeply committed, but also who may be carrying a lot more pressure than they themselves and maybe other people actually realize. And just kind of a little disclaimer that the goal today is definitely not to discourage ambition or striving for excellence. Instead, I think we're going to frame it as a dialogue how to do the meaningful work that you do, the high quality work that you do without sacrificing your mental health in that process. And I do want to make sure that this conversation today is practical and reflective and also engaging. And also, just so you know, you don't need to be, in crisis to benefit from thinking about your mental health. Sometimes the most helpful work in mental health actually happens earlier before you already burned out and facing some sort of mental health crisis. And if you are starting to notice patterns sooner, other than later, it's actually going to help you get to a place that is more sustainable with the minimum amount of loss. So as Lindsay mentioned, today's agenda is we're going to focus primarily on 5 key areas. We're going to talk about the high performer mindset, both about the strengths that make high performance effective, but also the trade-offs that come along with that particular mindset. And then we're going to talk about the early warning signs, especially some of the signs that are very easy to miss when somebody, whether you're talking about yourself or another person, when they, on the outside, they seem to be doing fine, but on the inside, all of these things are happening. And from the early signs, we are going to move towards rethinking success and self worth, because for many people who identify as high performers, achievement can become very closely tied to identity. And we're going to talk about the expanding that definition of success. And then we will move into the practical strategies and sustainable performance. And hopefully have some time for Q&A. But if questions come up throughout the presentation, like Lindsay shared, you can put them in Q&A or share them in the chat. Happy to answer as well. Also, to make this as engaging as possible, I am inviting you to join our polling feature. We're going to use Poll EV. And the easiest way to join the poll would be to text my name. My name is Natalia Andreev. No spaces. You send it to the number 22333. You will receive a confirmation text. You can use it throughout the presentation, or you can also open your browser, type in pollev.com, type in my name, and you can respond to all of the activities that we're going to have in that way. Again, these polls are completely anonymous. Everybody is invited to participate. They're not meant to put anybody on the spot. They just kind of for us to have a way to see what's showing up for people in the room. And again, just to make the conversation a little bit more interactive. All right. So I hope everybody had a chance to join. So our very first question is, when you think about being a high performer, what feels most familiar to you right now? It could be holding yourself to a very high standard, maybe catching yourself thinking that you are so reliable, but you often feel very stretched. Maybe you have trouble turning off work, right? So you're always in that work mode. Or maybe, you are trying to be proud of your accomplishments, but it's just so exhausting. Or maybe you are not quite sure if you're a high performer, and we're going to talk about different traits and different qualities that high performers possess. And again, you probably noticed that as we see the responses rolling in, there's no right answer here. This is really about just recognizing which part of this feels the most familiar to you in your particular situation right now. And again, many of you are choosing options like you've been stretched thin, you're holding yourself to the high standards, you have trouble turning off work. And that actually tells us something really important, that high performance may look very polished on the outside, but internally it can sometimes come with so much pressure that sometimes people don't know how to deal with. And I think by far, most people here are identifying with a statement that they're holding themselves to the very high standards. Okay, I think we still have votes rolling in, so we're gonna give it a few more moments, but yeah, we sort of have responses across all five categories, with the holding themselves to the highest standard being definitely in the lead. So again, I think we have figured out the poll. Thank you so much for participating. So we're going to move on and start with the high performer mindset. So when we talk about high performers, and for those of you who said, I'm not sure if I am a high performer, or maybe you're trying to identify, use this criteria for another person that you know, maybe a colleague, or maybe somebody that you are supporting, maybe you're in a leadership role. So when we think about the high performers, we usually talk about people who are, again, super motivated, super driven. They could be described as very dependable. They're very thoughtful, and they're really committed to doing things well, exceptionally well. And again, this is just wonderful qualities that a person can possess. And these qualities often allow people to, get promoted. So it's really good for their career growth. It allows them to gain trust from other people. Again, they open up leadership opportunities for folks, and definitely create internally, I think, for the high performers, it create a strong sense of pride. But we also know that every strength can definitely have a shadow side when it is overused and when it becomes the only mode that a person operates in. So, for example, if you're very driven, that drive can also become immense pressure. So that would be the shadow side of being driven and motivated. If you are super reliable, so reliability can also become difficulty saying no, right? So we might be foregoing our boundaries and allowing ourselves to be always maxed out and always over capacity. Maybe you are somebody, and I think a lot of us had identified in that call that you're holding yourself to very high standards, but high standards can also become perfectionism. And we're going to talk about the difference between perfectionism and excellence. Again, so today I think we should not label high performance as either something really good or something really bad. We're just looking at both sides of it, so we can actually come up with more of like a balanced view and keep the strength that actually make high performers who they are, while reducing the cost associated with the high performance. All right, so this slide shows the two sides of a high performer. So on one side, we can see the visible parts of high performance and their achievement, their focus comes with recognition, again, growth and advancement, a lot of momentum. And again, these are very visible qualities. And if you can think of more, again, this is not an exhaustive list. So if you think of more qualities that you have observed in other people or you know about yourself that makes you a high performer, please drop them in the chat. So for other people to take a peek as well. But this also shows up, because they're visible markers. This is where, it shows up in the praise that you receive, in the annual reviews that you have at your job, the promotions that you get, the number of projects that are completed, maybe, again, clients, or maybe internal team satisfaction surveys, or just visibly being known internally or externally as the person who gets things done, the person who other people can absolutely rely on in any given situation. Somebody commented that anxiety accompanies high performers. Absolutely. That's definitely one of the things we're also going to talk about. And then on the other side, I think that's where we can actually put anxiety. There are many things that people do not see, right? So they're not those visible markers. And that's that mental exhaustion, that fatigue that accompanies every effort, that's constant overthinking. And again, some level of anxiety, sometimes pretty severe anxiety that high performers cannot control or, for example, cannot rope in their overthinking. So a lot of pressure internally, sometimes loneliness, because maybe other people cannot relate. So they could feel really isolated. And definitely exhaustion, both mental and physical, and emotional. And again, if you think of yourself or somebody else that you know, that they are just meeting every deadline, they lead meetings, they care for other people, and they are so they still appear composed on the outside. Internally, in fact, they might be very, very depleted. Yeah, we have, so great comments in the chat. Thank you. So again, I think great example in the chat, but practical example from what I had observed. Somebody might respond to emails so quickly, they will, at the same time, they will move every project, that they are part of. They will keep it moving. They will show up prepared every day. You would never know that they're struggling internally, but the same person might be laying awake at night, not able to shut off their brain and actually have a restful night's sleep. They may be replaying those conversations or maybe worrying about something that they missed. Maybe they didn't even miss that, but they would be thinking and replaying the day to ensure that everything went smoothly. So, and that is a lot of invisible load that takes toll on their mental health. Again, the traits that sometimes drain high performers could be those high expectations, right? So yes, you yourself or other people hold you to a very high standard, but there's also the ones that are draining your energy. Constant self-doubt. Am I doing enough? Am I performing to my standard? Maybe the fear of falling behind, and fear of slowing down. What if I take some time off to actually care for myself and for mental health? Am I going to fall behind? Or again, that mentality sometimes that high performers have of never enough, right? So it doesn't matter how much you accomplish, you're always striving to do more. And if you think of this, this becomes a pretty unsustainable way of living. So, what actually make people really effective, right? We're going to name the strengths first because they're really real, and we should definitely take pride. Um, they often take ownership over outcomes. They don't just complete tasks; they actually care about the result. So they're reliable, and they will always follow through. And if a high performer says, "I will do something," people would just, without hesitation, trust that it's actually going to get done. And then I'm just glancing at the chat. Yeah, motivation could be misconstrued as praise seeking rather than truly self challenging or self assisting. Um, yeah, that could definitely be frustrating and sometimes alienating if people do not actually understand where you're coming from and where your motivation is coming from. Um, so, yeah, going back to what makes high performers effective, they also tend to have very high standards and very strong attention to detail. Again, I think when you think of the workplace, any employer would be lucky to have a high performer on their team because these qualities are extremely valuable in the workplace, but also they could be very valuable in personal life. They can help, they help teams function really well. They allow them to build trust within the team. And again, important work gets moved forward. And if you think about your personal life, people who are high achievers in the workplace, they probably translate that into their personal life as well, right? So they accomplish things, they get a lot done outside of the workplace, but at what cost? Um, Again, the challenge is to have all of this qualities, but also at the same time allow yourself to carve out the time to rest. So when you deeply care about something, or you have a lot of people who rely on you because you have the reputation of a high performer, sometimes just stepping back and caring for yourself can feel uncomfortable because that's not what you're used to. And again, some people said that I feel like I'm letting somebody down. Even when you simply, again, taking this time to take care of yourself, you would still have some guilt associated with it. So, what I think is one thing that people do not see about high performers that you have encountered. Could be one word, could be a short phrase, could be, I don't know, pressure or self-doubt or the exhaustion that is kind of runs bone deep, maybe fear of disappointing people. And as you guys are typing in your responses, I just want to see if we can determine if there's some themes going on. Yeah, the different emotions that accompany that. The imposter syndrome, absolutely. I love that one. When you know you're a high performer and you're being praised, but you still have that self doubt internally. I think one theme is coming up is related to the self doubt and doubting their own abilities. But that side of high performers is never the lack of ability. It's they're pretty capable. It's just again the amount of mental and emotional energy that it takes to keep performing at that level. Yeah, fear of failure, constant thinking and the thoughts, never being able to shut off the brain, exhaustion. Sometimes the resentment will build if you're not balancing out the recovery time with the commitment. Perfectionism. Yeah, using unhealthy coping skills. Absolutely. Yeah, perfectionism and exhaustion because high performers tend to think that the capacity is unlimited, um, but it never is, right? So everybody has capacity. And if we're going to operate under the assumption that the capacity is unlimited, that's what's going to lead to some serious burnout and other negative consequences. Yeah, sometimes people don't see the effort that they put into it, right? Could be long nights and working on weekends and, maybe foregoing other restorative activities in favor of completing a project, pressure, constant worrying. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it is invisible. And I think a lot of people would look at the visible signs if somebody is struggling or feeling overwhelmed. And high performers, because of them being high performers, they tend to also hide it pretty well. Yeah. Yeah, I love this. Pedaling like a duck under the water, but making it look easy. Yes, again, on the surface, it might look easy, but the actual effort that goes on behind the scenes is often invisible. Yes, other aspects of life, you can think about your family, your friends, the community, your interest, your emotional health, your spiritual health can be definitely taking a hit and suffering. Disappointing the colleagues, yes, by not delivering. And again, we need to talk about the scope and the capacity. Um, Absolutely. I think we do have several patterns and themes emerging through this conversation where the self doubt is one, exhaustion, whether we're talking about mental, physical, emotional, is definitely another one. Fear of being a disappointment, whether it's in your personal life, overthinking, and um, the syndrome. Yeah, that could be fear. Definitely can drive many of those. You know Decisions not to engage in a more balanced, sustainable way of living. Because if you had established the reputation of being the high performer, and now you are trying to say, hey, well, let me, take a look around and see if I can make my life a little bit more sustainable, then there's that fear of maybe losing your job potentially. Yeah, chronic fatigue, burnout. Oh, I love this. Thank you so much for participating. I think being overlooked, yes, I have noticed that many times high performance and high achievement could be the sign, I mean, could lead to promotions and recognition, but maybe there are circumstances or environments where it's the opposite. You do a lot, but you actually don't get recognized for your efforts, being undervalued. Um, yeah. Well, I'm going to keep this on for just another few moments because it feels like people really would like to share their thoughts in this particular call. I feel like it could be more than one thing. Thinking that a lot is on the plate. Yeah. Depression and stress, absolutely. If the burnout associated with high performance is not attended to and taken care of early on, it definitely can develop into a more serious mental health challenge, such as depression, chronic anxiety, or a few other conditions. Unhealthy pressure, yes, whether it's internal pressure or now external pressure because you have this reputation. Inability to relax definitely can relate to that at times. Okay. All right, great responses. Thank you so much for participating. So now we're going to talk about all of those hidden costs that often go unnoticed for us. The first one, and I think that was one of the themes in the previous poll, is the internal pressure. The sense that you always need to be doing more or doing better or just always staying ahead, even when no one else is demanding that from you. The pressure may become, this pressure may be coming from inside. So it could be either primarily internal, but also could be external. So, but again, something that other people do not see. Another area where I wanted to highlight is the over identification with one's work. And this is when what I do, right, that statement, what I do, starts to become who I am. And people kind of think along the lines of if my work is going well, if I'm doing great on my job, then I feel okay. But if they make a mistake, if they, God forbid, slow down or receive not an ideal feedback or express the need or even have a need, without even expressing it, they notice themselves catching the thought, I think I need a break, I need to rest. So that alone can feel like the threat to their identity, right? Again, they're not able to separate me as a person and me as an employee. And the third area that often goes unnoticed is the difficulty with actually stepping back, taking a break, resting, actually enjoying the wins, enjoying your accomplishments, being able to celebrate them instead of just a checkbox. I've done this project. I'm gonna take 15 more and just move on. Or another area is definitely asking for help. Again, high performer can just finish one task. Maybe it's a major project, and without hesitation, immediately move on to the next one. Again, no pause, no acknowledgement about the effort that it took. It's just, again, the overachiever, high performer mindset. I'm just going to keep going. And if it's just occasionally, I think it's okay. But if that becomes the norm and the rhythm, it definitely can be um, harmful for your health and your mental health, and also can drain both your motivation and joy, again, if this becomes an unsustainable pattern. Some of the reasons of why high performers are often are the last ones to ask for support is because, again, they're always seen and often see themselves, not just other people, how other people see them, but they see themselves as just being those very capable, very resilient people. Right. And maybe they are. But again, it's all about the pattern and about the sustainability. And when people are used to you as a high performer to handling things, they may not think to ask if you need help because you've established the reputation that you can handle it, right? So you're capable, you feel you're capable, and they assume that if you need help, you would ask for help. And for you as a high performer, when it comes to asking for help, it could be very, very uncomfortable to voice something like, um, I'm struggling, or I really need support here. Again, it's just not, those words are not in a high performance vocabulary, and we need to address that. Because, again, when you think about asking for help, it can feel like that you are admitting to a weakness or you've fallen short. But in reality, often this is just the sign of self-awareness, the sign that you know that unlimited capacity does not exist, and a sign of good judgment. So reframing again, I need to ask for help because I'm weak, to I need to ask for help because I have enough level of self-awareness, I'm exercising good judgment, and I really want to take care of myself and my mental health and set a good example, for example, to my team. Because functional performers, right? So what you actually see, it can mask depletion of resources so well. Because if you're still producing, you're not complaining, you're not asking for help, you're not asking for resources, you're not asking for assistance. Again, you're still performing, you're still showing up for your work, you're still meeting every deadline and every expectation. It could be easy to convince yourself and convince other people around you that nothing is wrong. And then you internalize this expectation, I just have to figure it out. And when all of these things happen, support will start to think like something we offer to everybody else and not necessarily something that we allow ourselves to receive. So, again, this is us building up on the high performers mindset. Now, we're going to shift our conversation to being able to recognize the early warning signs. And this section is definitely about catching those things earlier, because when we talk about burnout, and we have talked about burnout last month, we know it doesn't happen overnight. It builds up slowly through, again, repeated patterns where you are overextending yourself, when you're ignoring the fatigue, when you skip in recovery periods, where you pushing through stress, and we're telling yourself, I just need to get through this 1 week. It's stressful, but I just need to get through this. Because the problem is, this 1 week that you're trying to push through is going to become every week. So, as we move through the next couple slides here, I invite you to think less about really obvious signs of burnout and more about those subtle changes in your energy and your focus and your motivation and your emotions and your behavior that can hint you early on that something unsustainable is um, happening. Because, again, burnout is not, it doesn't always look like a total collapse. Sometimes when people are when they imagine burnout, they imagine maybe somebody who is completely shutting down, disengaging, or they said, I'm burned out, I'm quitting my job, or maybe they're crying at their desk or being unable to function at all. And that definitely can happen. I have worked with clients in the past who were in a state of pretty severe burnout, but many times, especially for high performers, burnout can look look quieter, I think. It can look like maybe a period of low energy that should improve over the weekend if you had a great restful weekend, but it doesn't. It could look like again mental exhaustion, where even small decisions that you had no problem making, now they are becoming really really hard for you. It can look like, again, your focus is no longer there. You catching yourself having a really really hard time being able to stay on one project, or rereading the same thing multiple times because you just can't seem to focus on something. Or maybe you are starting to struggle with things that normally handle so easily, and now all of a sudden they take up a lot more energy. Uh, Burnout also can look like loss of motivation. Again, not because you don't care anymore all of a sudden, but because your system has been running without energy and without proper recovery for just such a long time. So it's starting to affect your motivation. So, as far as the subtle signs of burnout, which one is the easiest for you to dismiss or push through as a high performer? So we have the options of low energy, mental fatigue, irritability, difficulty focusing, loss of motivation, or disrupted sleep. Yeah, so those are the little signs that are most likely for people to just explain away, right? Maybe you'll say, I feel low energy. I'm just tired, or I just been so busy, or maybe I used to say that to myself. I'll feel better once this project is over. I'm gonna have a lot more energy. So again, our basic needs tend to get ignored first when we are starting to get into that burnout state. And sometimes, again, I just didn't want to dismiss that sometimes this explanations can be true, right? You could be just tired. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are in burnout. So there could be a day that you're just exhausted, but then you recover and you feel fine. But when the signs keep repeating and you keep catching yourself on over and over and over, this could be a pretty valuable information given to you by your body or by your mind that they're trying to get your attention to actually do something. Yeah. It seems like low energy. Yeah. So people experience all these different signs and tend to dismiss them pretty easily as something that, again, it's not profound enough to actually do something about it. It's just, you know, it's just my energy. I'm just tired. But again, those could be your early little bells that are ringing. It's like, attention, you need to pay attention here. Right, so again, we're just going to summarize the signs here. So for the physical signs, this could include chronic fatigue, disrupted sleep, muscle tension, headache, stomach issues, getting sick more often because your immune system is down, and again, sometimes it could be a sign of something else. I always say, if you're experiencing physical symptoms, please check with your primary care doctor to rule out any medical conditions. But if you've been given a plain bill of health, then maybe it's worth to think about stress, burnout, or perhaps some kind of mental health challenge. When it comes to the emotional signs, we can think about irritability, dread, sense of numbness, loss of motivation. And for example, you've just noticed that things that normally don't bother you all of a sudden just start feeling overwhelming or really irritating you. That may be, again, a sign that your capacity is lower than usual. And then when it comes to behavioral signs, that will depend on a person, but it could range from procrastination to withdrawing from the people that you typically engage with, whether it's in a workplace or at home. Maybe you are scrolling too much. That's the only coping skill that you're engaging. And you have some interests and some hobbies outside of work, but you've been just foregoing those and just doom scrolling on your phone. That could be a behavioral sign. Again, none of this. Sometimes people who engage in this can be perceived as lazy or weak, which is not the case. They're just the coping strategies that show that your system is tired, exhausted, and overloaded. And again, they're coping skills because they might help you in a moment. They're just not the healthy coping skills. So And this brings us to the idea of the functional burnout, which is especially relevant when we're talking about high performers. And last month, when we talked about burnout, just again, more broadly, we define burnout as the state of chronic depletion that comes from ongoing stress without enough recovery. Again, chronic burnout or functional burnout is not just you being tired at the end of the busy week. It's what happens when the demands keep coming in. You keep taking them as a high performer, but the opportunities to rest, reset, recover, so you can feel restored are not keeping up, right? So there is just this big disbalance there. And there are different types of burnout, but again, for high performers, functional burnout is something that is the most relevant. And it can also be tricky because, again, if you're still performing well on the outside, but internally you feel depleted, it might not ring any bells for other people around you. Again, you're still hitting your goals, you're still answering your emails, you're leading meetings, and on the outside you seem to be smiling and doing well. You're taking care of your teams, or completing all of your responsibilities, meeting every deadline and expectation. And inside you're starting to catch yourself. I am running on empty. So, and then it can also show up at home as well. We talked about, caregiver fatigue when someone is constantly tending to the needs of other people and carrying that invisible workload. So, if you're a high performer in a workplace, most likely you're doing the same thing at home, and now you're actually doubling the demands and not creating enough time to actually recover. So, again, internal pressure tends to be a huge part of that picture. And I know a lot of us identified that in one of the polls that we took earlier. So when you are constantly self-monitoring and you have that feeling that you can never fully rest, it could definitely be so exhausting when, again, nothing looks wrong with you on the outside. So I think the main takeaway from this slide that I want you to remember is that functioning is not the same thing as actually being and feeling well. So again, you can be those two words. You can feel and you can be very productive, and at the same time feel very depleted. They can coexist in one sentence, right? And again, you can be at the same time very successful and feel so stretched thin that you are not even. Sometimes you wonder, how am I even functioning? And the earlier we recognize all of those warning signs, the more opportunity we have to actually make changes before that burnout becomes so serious that you might need some professional help. All right. So think about this for a second. And for this one, you can actually share in a chat. So, what has your energy been telling you lately? Again, maybe just a gut reaction. And again, you don't have to share it unless you want to, but if you do want to answer it just for yourself or share with somebody with us in a chat, feel free. But what has your energy been telling you? That has it been telling you that you need to slow down, to rest, that you need more support? Maybe you need more boundaries. Maybe you're striving for more connection. Um, Maybe you're seeking for more meaning in what you do and not just check the boxes. Yeah, let's take a few seconds and then we'll move on to the next section. Need a new job, tired and need a break. Boundaries, the guilt part. Being present in a moment can definitely be hard because you're not creating the mental space to even pause for a second. Boundaries, yeah. Having fun time and putting some boundaries in place. Absolutely. All right. So that tells me that you actually are thinking about this, that you do have a pretty good level of self-awareness. And that brings us to the next section as rethinking success and self-worth, because it's also a very important part of the conversation. Because burnout is not just having too much to do, like physically do something. Sometimes it's also about the meaning that we attach to what we do, right? And for people who identify as high performers, success can become deeply personal and really intertwined with their personality. So, and if you think about even one slightly missed deadline or a small mistake, or maybe you are in a slower season where you don't have to do that much, or maybe you just voice the need that you need to take a rest or to step back, it can actually be perceived internally as something really big and something significant, and sometimes even something foreign. And it can start to feel like it is a reflection of who you are and your actual value as a person. So in this next section, we're going to talk about uh, how the thinking patterns that we create around our self-worth in the context of high performance and our relationship, not only in the workplace but at home, how we can create maybe a healthy definition of success. Okay. One of the things that we can do for anything really, but also when we think about ourselves as high performers, is being able to reframe the thoughts. A lot of these thoughts are going to show up automatically. For example, the negative thought on this side is, I'm not good enough. I have to be better at this. And again, many of us would never say this out loud, but they will say something like this to themselves internally. So when it comes to reframing, the healthier version would be, instead of I'm not good enough, I've made this mistake, I had to do better. Maybe the reframe would be, and a healthy reframe would be, I'm growing. This is the sign of growth. I'm making progress. Yes, I've made this small mistake. It doesn't define my performance. It doesn't define who I am, and that is enough. Again, it doesn't mean that you stop trying to achieve maybe better performance. If that's really important, it just means that you are going to stop using shame as the fuel for your motivation. Again, I back in the day, I used to catch myself automatically thinking when I was given presentations, and I would just maybe stumble over a word or one part didn't go as smoothly as I wanted to. I would, at the end of the presentation, I would just like criticize myself. That was terrible. I should know better. I should do better. And then I started to do this work on myself and making sure that my thoughts about my assessment of my performance were way more balanced, and something that I've been again telling myself. And I do a lot of presentations, so I would tell myself, yeah, well, most of it went really well, and there was one hiccup in this one part, and we're just going to do better next time. And I noticed that it definitely helped me reframe my thinking more towards the growth mindset, and not necessarily attacking my self-worth. And for high performers, again, when identity and performance become so tangled, because we allow our self-worth to be tied directly to what we accomplish. Again, all of those projects that we complete, all of those boxes that we check. So when we are producing, when we are achieving, when we're helping, when we have this insane level of success, we will feel so valuable. It's going to feel so good to a high performer. And then a situation when your output maybe dips because you got ill, maybe you had to shift your focus towards your family temporarily because you needed to be a caregiver for somebody. Maybe there was a life transition, or maybe just because you're human and your output again it is allowed to fluctuate, but it can feel to a high performer like you're completely failing because again, your identity is so tied to your accomplishments. And again, I think when you look here, the key distinction would probably be any metric, right? So any metric that you think of in the context of your particular job, any metric can change. It can go up, it can go down, but it is not changing your self-worth. Just try to remember that, if anything. Your productivity, again, it's naturally for it to fluctuate depending on the season, on how busy things are at work, what happens outside of work. But your value should not fluctuate with your productivity. Again, the metrics are not tied to your self worth, and your productivity is not tied to your value. you're valuable and you're worthy just because you are. And again, you're having a slower week, please do not think or frame it as, am I becoming less capable? Or if you are asking for help, you finally got to the point where you can ask for help. Again, it doesn't mean that you're less competent. It just means that you're self aware. Again, taking a break is good practice. It doesn't erase your work ethic at all. It just, you still have the same strong ethics that people know you for. And it just means that you're a person who has needs, person who has limits. And again, when it comes to humans, we don't have infinite capacity, and limits are not failures. They're just that, they're just limits. Now, another important distinction is between the professionalism and the perfectionism and excellence. Again, I think we had seen the word fear appear so many times, and that's a very important distinction. So the perfectionism often is often driven by fear, right? It could be fear of falling behind, fear of judgment, not being good enough, disappointing folks. Again, maybe fear of, am I just, you catching yourself thinking, am I settling? Am I, not doing enough? And again, when people become perfectionists, because they're driven by that fear, again, and they think about, well, I should maybe take a break. Then again, they're like, oh, but that's irresponsible. That's going to take away from the time that where I can be more productive. Or again, the standards that you set for yourself, it can actually become the weapon that you use against yourself too, because now you're not allowed to not achieve those standards. I guess internal pressure. And then when we think about the healthier part, the excellence, that's actually very different, because if perfectionism is driven by fear, excellence, on the other hand, is driven by, growth and the sense of purpose and enjoyment and what we do and the deep care for our work and our colleagues. Again, it values quality and effort, but also I think when we're talking about excellence, it recognizes this, that again, rest is essential. It's an essential part of the process. And again, the standards are there to be your guides and not necessarily to punish you there. So again, for somebody who engages in perfectionism, it could say, this has to be flawless or it would not count, right? So this pretty black and white thinking. And if we take the same example and translate it into excellence, it could sound like this, and you can fill in the blank at what this is. It needs to be thoughtful, it needs to be clear, it needs to be useful, and I can improve it over time. So that's the difference between the two. Now, if we are to expand a little bit more on the success and what that means to high performers, again, they often measure it by, again, the output, the results that you produce, and the impact that you have. And I'm not saying that this thing should not matter. They absolutely do matter, but they just don't pay, they don't paint the whole picture. So if that's the only way you measure success, you're just going to drain your energy, and it's going to be a pretty unsustainable way of living life and working too. And what people tend to left out is the quality of the relationships and your presence, right? So not only your output matters, but also, are you able to be present with the people that you care about, whether it's in the workplace or definitely outside of the workplace? Is big, is the level of presence with people, again, depending on how busy you are. If you're really overwhelmed at work with a lot of projects, you might catch yourself, yes, physically I'm here, but mentally I'm still completing this last task that I was supposed to leave for tomorrow. And also, I think how you feel while achieving something, right? Those great results and those great outputs, it definitely matters. But somebody mentioned the word anxiety. So if you're achieving the goals, but at the same time you're feeling anxious, you're feeling perhaps disconnected from yourself or from your relationships, maybe you start to develop resentment. I think somebody mentioned resentment as well, or you feel exhausted the entire time. Again, this is maybe worth asking whether your definition of success currently is actually sustainable, or does it need to expand? So, some of the practical strategies that we can talk about, we can frame them as four pillars of sustainable performance. And they are setting boundaries. Some people said in the chat or in the last poll that setting boundaries is something that they do need to do. And boundaries definitely protect our time and energy. So, you can do your best work. The second one, practicing self compassion. And then we're going to talk about regular intervals of being able to recharge and rest and rejuvenate, and then seeking support. All right. So, another poll. Which one of those pillars do you think you need to focus most right now? Yeah, self compassion and boundaries. Yeah. All right. So, I think we're kind of, again, people need different things at this moment, depending again where you are um, in your mental state, your burnout state, if you are in burnout. Yeah, but we have a lot of folks who have trouble creating time to recharge and rest. All right, well, we're going to start with boundaries. And again, when you think about boundaries, I want you to think not about the walls that you build to keep the work out, but they just that structure that just preserves your time and actually keeps you in the game. So again, one clear boundary is to actually find and define that clear point where your workday ends, right? And protect that. Once you found that point, protect it as much as possible. Again, it could be closing your laptop at some time, turning off your notifications, maybe creating rituals that going to signal that work is done. It's transition time. I'm transitioning to my home life, to my personal life. And that could include communicating your availability more proactively. For example, instead of waiting until you're so overwhelmed, you might say, I am available for this up until if it's urgent or if it's an emergency, you can definitely reach me for those. But other than that, I will respond the next day, for example. And again, boundaries work best when they are clear, and we know clear is kind, when they're consistent. And most importantly, when you place the boundary and you communicate it before your resentment starts building up. All right. The next one is managing that internal pressure that many of you had identified as well. Um, and one of the practical ways to do that, to manage that internal pressure, is notice and reframe that critical self talk that you might be engaging. Again, if you have that inner critic that always says that's not good enough, again, taking a breath, taking a mental pause, and asking, well, or maybe saying, actually, that went really well. And asking yourself, well, what would I do differently next time? Again, way kinder, way softer. And I think this is where people need to pair accountability with kindness. You can, again, you can learn, you can admit that you maybe it wasn't flawless or that you've made a mistake without attacking yourself and your sense of self worth. So, again, self compassion, right? We are often way more understanding and caring and compassionate towards other people and forget to apply the same rule to ourselves. And especially, I think when it comes to high performance, they definitely struggle because it's just not familiar. We're caretakers for other people, we have it under control, and now you have to apply the same to yourself. That's not something I'm very comfortable doing. So yeah, but practicing self-compassion is the must. And then the third pillar is being able to manage your energy. Again, high performers could be really good at time management because they can organize things, calendars, meet deadlines. Again, we know they structure tasks really well, but time management is not necessarily equivalent to the energy management because, again, you can time manage really well at the same time, not manage your energy and feel so depleted. So, helpful question could be, what are the activities out there that actually restore my energy? Movement, quiet time, creativity, going for a walk, connecting with somebody, having a slow morning for a change. And another question to ask yourself would be, what drains me, even if it looks productive? For example, again, if you know that back-to-back meetings could be very productive, but they kind of, again, leave you completely drained at the end of the workday, maybe you need to restructure your calendar. Maybe constant task switching is something that drains you. That's again another area where you can take a look, because again, building the recovery pockets into your workday is also a really helpful strategy. Even again, if it's a 10-minute reset every couple hours, that could have a pretty significant impact. And definitely asking for help and doing so earlier. Help is definitely not, the last resort that people sometimes think about it, because again, high performers tend to not reach out for support until it's perhaps too late or they're really forced to, and they will continue pretending that they have this unlimited capacity. But again, a simple phrase to remember here would be, I would benefit from a thought leader in this. Do you have 20 minutes? Again, you're not admitting weakness, you're just sharing a kind request with a colleague or to your boss that is very specific, that is respectful, and very practical. So the goal is to ask before you're at the breaking point, because again, the earlier you ask for support, the easier and the more effective and the less disruptive that support will be. And I know, it's hard to ask for help sometimes, but I can assure you that I say this in every webinar, no man is an island. We are not meant to live life alone. And that's why we build and we have those support systems. And I know we're almost at time, so we have a couple minutes left. So I just wanted to go over that sustainability cycle and invite you all to take this diagram and implement it in your daily life. It just shows how a balanced day would look like, where you have the moments of refresh, focus, recover, and reflect. And when you think about refreshing, that means starting the day with intention instead of immediately jumping into a phone call or answering emails. The focus piece means that you're doing, again, meaningful work and that you're making progress instead of striving for perfection. For the rest and recovery piece, could include any movements, any unwinding strategy, making sure you get enough sleep, or just simply, again, stepping away from the situation. And the reflection part means that you are taking the pause long enough to notice what you have learned about yourself and your mental state and what you might need. And we are going to skip to this slide. And this is the practical exercise that I invite you to engage after this webinar. I would like you to commit to one habit that you're going to start that is going to support your energy, support your focus, support your well-being, and also one habit that you're going to stop. And again, this is something that you had noticed is depleting your energy, your resources. Maybe you're well aware, but you've been tolerating it. Now it is time to give yourself that promise that you're going to try and stop engaging in that habit. It could be, again, something as simple as I've been skipping meals, or I've been saying yes to everything, and I'm going to try and stop that. Something realistic, something small, and maybe we can close out with this poll where you can share your commitment with me. What is one small habit that you're going to either start or stop? If you already know it, if you need some time to reflect, that's fair too. Yeah, overextending. Yeah, great habit to stop. A good habit to start is giving yourself grace during the challenging times. Taking a few days and a year to regroup and refocus. Love it. Doom scrolling. I'm going to sign up for this one too. Committing to too many things at once and saying yes to everything. And I know we're at times, but I appreciate everybody hanging out with us till the end. Yeah, stopping critical self-talk and actively relaxing. So while we are looking at all of the commitments that the people making, I wanted to thank everybody for being here. You've been a great audience. I appreciate the engagement that we had. I know we didn't get a chance to get to the Q&A. It was just such a great topic. And again, we will make the recording available. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at telehealth.